Early in July 1884, a Montana schoolteacher and his family quietly crossed the border into Canada at the request of a group of Métis and white settlers.
I will accept your very kind invitation. The Canadian government owes me 240 acres of land. By petitioning the government with you, perhaps we will have the good fortune to obtain something.
Louis Riel is back. Not to launch an armed revolt, but in hopes of peacefully obtaining a parcel of land he believes is his due. That will soon change. What begins as an attempt by frustrated Métis and white settlers to win land rights and political power will end in rebellion, massacre, and the gravest crisis in the young country's history. Across the Northwest, there is growing talk of rebellion, but not from Louis Riel. It can be found in newspapers like Frank Oliver's Edmonton Bulletin.
If history is to be taken as a guide, what could be plainer than without rebellion, the people of the Northwest need expect nothing, while with rebellion, successful or otherwise, they may reasonably expect to get their rights.
At a public meeting in Prince Albert, 500 white settlers are surprised to hear Riel, the exiled leader of the Red River Resistance, urge them to negotiate peacefully with the federal government.
Instead of wasting your time sending individual petitions, would it not be better to act together as one group? Gentlemen, do not compromise your rights. Protest if you are forced to, but do it within the limits of the law.
In Ottawa, Prime Minister MacDonald is watching Riel's movements carefully. He fears Riel could be the catalyst uniting all the dissident groups in Saskatchewan.
At this moment, Riel has gone into the Northwest. One cannot foresee what he may do, or what they, under his advice, may do. We have certain uneasy elements. The Farmers' Union agitators, the French half-breeds, advised by Riel. Indian element, headed by such Indian loafers as Big Bear.
MacDonald's uneasy elements are already looking for ways to unite against him. Big Bear is invited to Prince Albert to meet Louis Riel. After years of poverty, Big Bear is overwhelmed by the abundance of food and other luxuries he sees in the home of Will Jackson's brother. Riel tries to persuade him to join the Métis and the Settlers' Union in a common front against the federal government.
This is a nice house. These are nice things. But if you do as I tell you, you will have a grander house, better things, and plenty to eat. What I say to you, I say to all my brother chiefs, and I want you to tell them my words when you go back.
But Big Bear's goal is a united Cree nation demanding the renegotiation of Treaty 6. An alliance with Riel is tempting, but after all he has been through, he cannot trust him or the Settlers' Union. In the Métis settlements along the South Saskatchewan River, there is unwavering support for Riel. Here he has established a solid base for his campaign against Ottawa. Back among his people, Riel's old passions are rekindled. He believes the Métis are a chosen people.
My Lord Jesus Christ, I implore you, choose us, the French-Canadian Métis, and make us your favorite nation.
The religious obsessions that brought him to an insane asylum in Quebec 15 years earlier are resurfacing.
I am a prophet of the New World.
Will Jackson, who is helping Riel draft a petition to the federal government on behalf of the Métis and the Settlers Union, sees none of this.
Louis Riel of Manitoba fame has united the half-breed elements solidly in our favor. His general bearing is frank and straightforward, indicating sincerity of purpose and assurance of his convictions.
Riel's petition arrives in Ottawa in December and is promptly ignored. MacDonald doesn't realize that he has passed up his last opportunity to prevent rebellion. It is a long and bleak winter for Louis Riel. He is penniless, his family forced to accept charity. As the months drag on, Riel becomes increasingly militant. Now he is convinced that Ottawa has nothing to offer but bully tactics.
The petitions sent to the government are not listened to. Moreover, the Dominion has taken the high-handed approach of answering peaceful complaints by reinforcing their mounted police. The Métis are determined to save their rights or die.
Rumors spread that the police are about to arrest him. The Settlers Union and even many of his Métis followers are becoming apprehensive. Riel is running out of time. In a fateful step, he declares an independent Métis state, its capital an obscure settlement named Batoche. This is a bargaining tactic intended to force MacDonald to negotiate. But MacDonald continues to ignore Riel. He is preoccupied with a more pressing crisis. The CPR is on the verge of bankruptcy. But the very day the CPR president tells him about the hopeless condition of the railway, something happens in Saskatchewan that changes the course of history. Duck Lake, a few miles from Batoche. 200 of Riel's Métis and a handful of Indians battle a column of 100 mounted police and civilian volunteers. The battle is not planned, but when heavily armed police and Métis fighters run into each other on the same road, a clash is inevitable. And when it is over, 3 police and 9 civilian volunteers lie dead in the snow. Riel watches the battle on horseback, holding a wooden cross and praying aloud. He only wanted to get the government's attention and never planned to fight. Now fate has intervened. For a shaken Riel, the victory is a sign from God that his cause must be just.
God has been pleased to grant us the victory. And as our movement is to protect our rights, our victory is just, and we offer it to the Almighty.
But the victory is costly. The settlers have never supported armed rebellion. They terminate their alliance with the Métis. Riel is now alone with his prayers and his hopes that the Indians will join him. Back in Ottawa, MacDonald is calling out the militia and planning to use his new railway to rush them to the west. Across the Northwest Territories, in the nights leading up to the battle at Duck Lake, there was a spectacular display of northern lights. Starblanket, a Cree chief, knew the meaning of their unusual color.
Look, the light is red. Prepare to learn of pestilence and the shedding of blood. And the ghost dance is read. Misery is at hand.
When Parliament is told of the defeat at Duck Lake, the first question is not about the Métis. Liberal leader Edward Blake wants to know about the Indians.
What is the condition of the food supplies? It is very obvious that the possibility of the Indians taking an effective part in this unhappy business must greatly depend on the food supply.
MacDonald's biggest worry is Crowfoot and his well-armed Blackfoot warriors. Riel has been sending messages asking them to join his rebellion. Orders are given to immediately increase the food rations.
This insurrection is a bad business, but we must face it as best we may. The first thing to be done is to localize the insurrection.
Reports of the Métis victory at Duck Lake spread quickly to all the settlements in the northwest. In Edmonton, a few minutes after the alarming news arrives, the telegraph line goes dead. Settlers prepare to abandon their homes for the security of the old Hudson's Bay fort. Here they find some old guns, but no ammunition. The men set to work making their own. There are 2,000 armed Cree warriors on the nearby reserves and no hope of outside support. Lavisa McDougall finds herself with the other women fashioning crude cartridges out of cloth.
We are living in the most intense excitement. We expect any hour to hear the Indians have broken out. Messengers have been sent from Riel to our Indians across the river, and word has been sent around to all the Indians north of us.
Homesteaders flood in from the surrounding farms, bringing wild rumors to the already terrified settlers.
Indians all around us were plundering and killing cattle, destroying everything they could not carry away. People had to run for their lives. The mails could not come or go, and no one dared travel far from home. The whole place, town and country, was completely paralyzed.
But the next flashpoint of the Northwest Rebellion is not Edmonton. It's an isolated settlement 100 miles down the North Saskatchewan called Frog Lake. Big Bear and his band are camped nearby. The old chief had urged his people not to join the rebellion, believing that only diplomacy would protect his people. But now he is undermined.
When news of the fight at Duck Lake reached us, my band ignored my authority and despised me because I did not side with the half-breeds.
A warrior's council takes control of the band, then rides into Frog Lake to demand food. When the local Indian agent refuses, he is shot. The warriors loot the settlement. Ignoring Big Bear's pleas, they murder 9 settlers, including 2 priests. Louis Goulet, who was taken prisoner by the warriors, witnessed the attack.
I could hear gunshots and whoops coming from everywhere. The Indians were drunk with ferocity. I saw Father Marchand, one of the 2 priests, fall on his knees, arms crossed. Yes, raised to heaven. He was gunned down on the spot. I never saw him move again.
The murders at Frog Lake electrify the country. Newspapers print lurid and wildly exaggerated accounts of a massive Indian uprising. From Halifax to Winnipeg, young men eager to defend their country rush to the drill halls. The volunteer soldiers of Canada's 1st National Army marched to the railroad stations anticipating epic battles and great victories. In less than a fortnight, militia units from Ontario and Quebec arrive in Winnipeg on troop trains hastily assembled by the CPR. McDonald's Railway is proving its worth. Far to the south of Batoche, one crucial question remains. Will Crowfoot join Riel's rebellion? There are chiefs who are ready to fight. But Crowfoot remembers the throngs of white men he had seen in Winnipeg. He knows that thousands of soldiers are coming, and he had been given more food rations. Crowfoot makes up his mind. His decision is telegraphed to Ottawa and read aloud in the House of Commons.
I wish to send to you the words I have given at a council, at which all my minor chiefs and young men were present. We are agreed and determined to remain loyal to the Queen.
Crowfoot's pledge of loyalty is a godsend for MacDonald. A full-scale Indian uprising has been avoided. Now he can concentrate on the trouble spots along the Saskatchewan. The stage is set for a showdown with Louis Riel at Batoche. It has taken almost a month, but Canada's Volunteer Army is at last on the Saskatchewan plains. The final act of the Northwest Rebellion is about to begin. In command of the troops is General Frederick Middleton. He was a former British officer with a typical disdain for colonial troops, made worse when he watched their target practice.
After the drill was over, I went down the ranks of the 90th and questioned each man, and found that many of them had never fired a rifle. Some had never fired any weapon at all. This is not a cheerful outlook after receiving a telegram dwelling on the excellence of the shooting of the half-breeds.
Middleton moves cautiously. He sends one column of troops to Calgary, then north to protect Edmonton and to hunt for Big Bear. A smaller column is sent to relieve Fort Battleford, where settlers have taken refuge, fearing an attack by Chief Poundmaker's warriors. Middleton leads the main force on a 200-mile march to Batoche. Gabriel Dumont, the Métis military commander, is waiting for him.
My plan was to go out and meet the enemy, because they were already showing weakness by hesitating to advance. I wanted to get behind them, kill them, and take their guns. That was always my first thought, to get more guns.
The first skirmish is near a coulee called Fish Creek. Hidden in the dense thickets, Dumont launches an ambush. Father Fourmont, who is helping Métis families flee, fears the worst.
We hear clearly the cannon and the gunfire that announced they were seriously engaged in combat. We experience pangs of anguish. Sadness overcomes all of us at the thought of our dear Métis, perhaps being decimated by the enemy's grape shot and hail of bullets.
But Dumont's fighters are holding their own. Despite superior firepower, Middleton's troops cannot break through the Métis defenses.
Other officers and men were now very anxious to be allowed to again try and rush the rifle pits. But I had already lost too many of my citizen soldiers, and did not think it advisable to risk losing more, as we certainly should have done in the second attempt.
But the small Métis army cannot hold off the Canadians indefinitely. A desperate Riel continues his appeal for Indian reinforcements.
Indians of Battleford, rise up and face the police. If it has not yet been done, take Battleford. Destroy. Come to join us. You can easily send us 40 or 50 men.
Poundmaker's camp is only a few days' ride from Batoche. His Cree warriors had fought off a surprise attack by Middleton's troops sent to protect Battleford, but Poundmaker had refused to go on the offensive.
I did everything to stop bloodshed. If I had not done so, there would have been plenty of blood spilled this summer. I have saved the lives of many.
But his young warriors have tasted victory and want to join Riel. Poundmaker still refuses to get involved in the rebellion. Riel and the Métis are now alone. In Batoche, Riel sinks deeper into his religious mania. He prays so long that he needs help holding his arms in the shape of a cross. He wants to rename the days of the week. He believes God wants him to appoint a new pope. His increasingly bizarre beliefs alarm the only white man to join his rebellion, Will Jackson.
Mr. Riel proposed himself to me as the prophet of the New World. I concluded that Mr. Riel was presumptuous and wrong. I wrote that I could not accept his mission.
Jackson will not abandon Riel, but many of the Batoche Métis are unnerved by his growing obsessions.
If we're fighting, it's not over religion, but over our rights. You came here to protect our rights, and all you talk about is religion.
The ambush at Fish Creek has only slowed the Canadians. Now they resume their advance.
I have seen the giant. He is coming. He is Goliath. Oh my God, grant us the favor, so that we beat them one after another.
One gun ready! Number one, fire!
In the first week of May, the Canadians reach the outskirts of Batoche. Once again, the embattled Métis hold out against superior numbers and overwhelming firepower, including the first use of the Gatling gun. Sergeant Walter Stewart admires their courage.
Our whole line extended a full mile. At this point, the Indians and half-breeds put up their real fighting, running from rifle pit to rifle pit, firing as they went, stubbornly contesting every foot of ground.
Finally, after 3 days of fierce resistance, the Métis are overwhelmed. Gabriel Dumont fights to the very end.
We had no more ammunition. The troops advanced and our men came out of their trenches. It was then they were killed. The balance sheet of these 4 days of desperate fighting was for us 3 wounded and 12 dead, as well as a child killed, the only victim of the famous Gatling gun.
Riel, Dumont, and what remains of the Métis forces escape. Robert Allen is among the Canadian troops who ransack Batoche.
Our men have been pillaging. Each man has something he intends to keep as a souvenir.
The Métis wanted nothing more than recognition of their rights as citizens of Canada's Northwest. Their hope ended at Batoche in tragedy and degradation. The Northwest Rebellion has been crushed. 3 days later, Louis Riel surrenders. A triumphant Middleton telegraphs MacDonald.
Riel is my prisoner. What is to be done with him? I await instructions here.
Poundmaker, whose warriors defeated the Canadians near Fort Battleford, voluntarily disarms his men as General Middleton requests. 2 months later, Big Bear comes out of hiding and surrenders. Like the majority of the Cree, he insists he had not rebelled. The troops return home to a hero's welcome. There are medals for all, and no one seems to care that millions of dollars were spent putting down a rebellion that could have been avoided. MacDonald is elated.
Canada is delirious with enthusiasm upon the return of our volunteers. This has done more to weld the provinces into one nation than anything else could have done.
But MacDonald's dreams of unity will soon evaporate. For even in defeat, Riel has the power to tear the country apart. After the fall of Batoche, police and militia round up anyone suspected of taking part in the rebellion, including Will Jackson and Louis Goulet.
We found ourselves with everybody who'd taken part in the rebellion one way or another. There was Riel and his council, the people who were at Duck Lake, Fish Creek, Batoche, as well as Indians who'd taken part in the uprising, and others who'd been attacked. Poundmaker and his band. The prison was full to overflowing.
Life is returning to normal in the settlements. Johnny McDougall's store in Edmonton does a brisk business resupplying homesteaders who had spent many anxious weeks waiting for the Indian uprising. Yet, like many of the settlers, McDougall remains sympathetic to the plight of the Indians.
The Hudson's Bay Company had no right to sell this country. It belonged to the Indians. And the government, since getting their country, has not treated them right. There is general dissatisfaction among all the classes of people in this country against the government, and for many good reasons.
At Mounted Police Headquarters in Regina, Canada's most infamous rebel is shackled to the wall of a tiny wooden cell. Louis Riel remains defiant. He plans to vindicate himself in a spectacular trial he wants held in Quebec.
I was not taken prisoner. I surrendered on purpose. I want to be judged on the merits of my actions. From the time of my arrival in Saskatchewan, I worked peacefully. We didn't make any aggressive military moves. In Batoche, we defended ourselves.
Sir John A. MacDonald has no intention of creating a grandstand for the man who has led 2 armed uprisings. He wants Riel hanged. That cannot be guaranteed under Canadian law, so he resorts to an ancient British charge of high treason. It prescribes only one penalty: death. There is another problem. The trial is to be heard in the Manitoba Superior Court, But Alexander Campbell, the federal justice minister, is told that in Manitoba, half the jurors could be Métis.
The jury in Winnipeg would be composed of 12, of whom the prisoner might insist that moiety be half-breeds. In Regina, however, the prisoner would not be entitled to a mixed jury.
The trial is quietly moved. There is an almost carnival atmosphere in the tiny settlement of Regina. Hotels are packed with officials and lawyers. There are newspapermen from around the world. The curious line up for hours, paying $10 for a chance to watch the biggest trial in Canadian history. It is a sweltering July morning when Louis Riel is brought into the prisoner's box. His trial is conducted in a simple magistrate's court with a part-time judge. The jury is made up of 6 men. Only one speaks any French. Riel's lawyers argue that a man who calls himself a prophet of God, who wants to choose a new pope and move the seat of the Catholic Church to Canada, is clearly insane and therefore not responsible for his actions. Riel insists otherwise.
I suppose that after having been condemned, I will cease to be called a fool. And for me, it is a great advantage. I have a mission. I cannot fulfill my mission as long as I'm looked upon as an insane being. If I am guilty of high treason, I say that I am a prophet of the New World.
Despite his extravagant rhetoric, Riel impresses the jury as respectful, entertaining, and perfectly sane. Will Jackson is also on trial in the Regina courtroom. His lawyer also pleads insanity, and like Riel, Jackson disagrees.
I have always declared myself perfectly responsible. That is to say, as Riel's secretary, and I wish to share his fate, whatever that may be.
But a string of witnesses, including his brother, have no difficulty convincing a Protestant jury that a white Methodist settler who joined the Métis Rebellion and converted to Catholicism could be nothing but insane. Jackson is committed to the Selkirk Lunatic Asylum in Manitoba, but manages to escape to the United States a few months later. It takes the jury barely an hour to reach a verdict on Riel. Guilty, with a recommendation for mercy. But on August 3rd, 1885, the judge ignores their plea and sentences him to death. The verdict is applauded in Ontario and condemned in Quebec. Will Jackson, the English Protestant, is spared. Riel, symbol of the hopes of French Catholics in the West, will hang. For Quebec, this is not justice.
Riel is condemned to be hanged. We can't be surprised. The whole thing was arranged from the beginning. Upper Canada needed a scapegoat.
There is mounting pressure in Quebec to commute Riel's sentence. But if he agrees, MacDonald fears he will lose Ontario. An MP warns him, if Riel is not hanged, we will never poll another Conservative vote. MacDonald must gamble.
The conviction of Riel is satisfactory. There is an attempt in Quebec to pump up a patriotic feeling about him, but I don't think it will amount to much.
He could not have been more wrong. November 7th, 1885. Sir John A. Macdonald's dream of a Canadian railway stretching from sea to sea has come true. But instead of rejoicing, Macdonald is trying to contain a political crisis over the hanging of Riel. He is even receiving death threats. Riel's execution draws closer. The Conservative Party is in turmoil. Joseph-Adolphe Chapleau, a key Quebec cabinet minister, prepares to resign, but after a long night of soul-searching, he decides this will only inflame the situation.
Suddenly I saw in front of me such a sight of tumult, fighting, bloodshed, misery. I saw the isolation of French Canada and racial hatred provoking retaliation, fighting, and disaster. I was horrified.
Chapleau agrees to stay. The cabinet closes ranks and votes to proceed with the hanging. MacDonald is defiant.
He shall hang, though every dog in Quebec bark in his favor.
November 16th, 1885. The dawn breaks clear and bright over Regina. In his cell at Mounted Police Headquarters, Riel writes his last letters and in the company of 2 priests says his final prayers.
For 15 years they have pursued me in their hate, and never yet have they made me waver. Today still less when they lead me to the scaffold. And I'm infinitely grateful to them for releasing me from this dreadful captivity that weighs on me.
The sheriff, a French Canadian, refuses to deliver the execution order. So at the appointed hour, an English-speaking deputy escorts Riel to the gallows. Watching is a reporter from the Regina Leader.
Father McWilliams, his stole over his overcoat, led the procession out of the cell. He was followed by Riel, carrying a small ivory crucifix set in silver. Behind him came the Northwest Mounted Police in red tunics.
The small procession climbs the stairs to the gallows. Beneath the platform, 2 doctors and George Ham of the Toronto Mail wait as the Lord's Prayer is recited.
The hangman sprang the bolt at 28 minutes past 8, and Riel shot downward with a terrible crash. For a second, he did not move. A slight twitching of the limbs was noticed, but instantly, all was still again. In 2 minutes after the fall, Louis Riel was no more.
Word of the hanging is quickly telegraphed across the country. The reaction in Quebec is swift.
They hanged him. It was 11:12 in the morning when the cursed telegram arrived in Montreal. 10 minutes later, all Montreal knew the news and all activity was suspended. Everywhere we heard, they hanged him. Poor Riel is dead.
Public meetings are called. Students march through the streets shouting a protest song set to the tune of the Marseillaise. What do these slave masters want, they sing? Who do these orange men conspire against? They'd like to see us in our coffins, these tyrants whose insane arrogance blinds them and makes them deaf to our prayers. MacDonald's Quebec ministers, especially Chapleau, are branded as murderers and traitors. Pictures of Riel draped in black appear in shop windows. The song ends with these words: "Children, hold on to the memory of these 3 cursed ministers. They are traitors. Let's get rid of these infidels." In Montreal, 50,000 people jam the Champ de Mars to condemn Riel's execution. MacDonald is burned in effigy before the cheering crowd. Across English-speaking Canada, jubilant crowds celebrate Riel's death. Anti-French demonstrations are encouraged by newspaper editorials appealing to prejudice and hatred.
We are sick of the French Canadians with their patriotic blabber. As far as we are concerned, Quebec could go out of Confederation tomorrow and we would not shed a tear, except for joy.
Attacks by the Quebec Liberals, the Rouge, are weakening the Conservative Party. MacDonald now realizes that Riel will continue to haunt him.
The triumph of the Rouge over the corpse of Riel changes affairs completely. It will encourage the opposition, dispirit our friends, and will, I fear, carry the country against us at the general election.
MacDonald will win the next federal election, but his hold on Quebec has been broken. Never again can he count on the one province that had always supported him.